listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast with your host, Andy Plymer. Bringing you up-to-date coaching concepts from the world of rugby. Sharing ideas to make the game better.
All right, welcome to episode number 100 of the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. I'm your host, Andy Plymer, and joining me today is Wayne Smith. He's a Rugby World Cup winning coach. He's won Super Rugby titles with the Crusaders and the Chiefs. He's the current director of rugby with the Kobelco Steelers in Japan. He's influenced countless coaches worldwide, and it's an absolute pleasure to have him on the show. So welcome, Wayne.
Thanks, Andy. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. Thanks for joining. And I got a good story to talk to mates at the pub with. I got your email address from coaching legend Pierre Villeperot. So that's a good yarn.
Yeah.
So before we get going into the coaching side of things, you've probably answered this one a bunch of times. 100 words or less, your playing career, both club and for your country. What did that look like?
Small town boy. Come from a little town in the Waikato called Putaruru. Played for Putaruru High School, which back in those days, this is back in the 70s, early 70s, was a stronghold of New Zealand rugby. All those hinterland areas were where a lot of the players were coming from.
Yeah.
So my dream coming out of high school was to play for Putaruru seniors. I went to Waikato University and fulfilled my dream. So I came back and played for Putaruru. I had made some sort of Waikato junior teams, but the coach of the Waikato senior team had suggested that I was never going to be a first five as long as my bum pointed downwards. So, and he was probably right at the time.
Yeah.
I came from a small town and didn't have a lot of sophisticated coaching techniques that others had. But it was my first coaching lesson, Andy, because he underestimated what I had inside me.
Yeah, awesome. Isn't that great?
I've always forced myself not to do. So after university, I decided there was no future for me in the Waikato region. So I went down to Teachers College in Christchurch. I played for Belfast, sort of a countryish type club down there. Made Canterbury through my first year through a series of lucky events. Got a break with Canterbury. Ended up playing an All Black trial the following year in my home ground in Hamilton.
Yeah.
Which was interesting, going back there as an All Black trialist. Made the All Blacks. So played for Canterbury from 79 through till about 88, with some breaks in between going overseas. Played for the All Blacks, had 35 games for the All Blacks, and was captain of the All Black Sevens. So I played in 3 tournaments in Hong Kong.
Oh, wow, cool. That was early days sevens then too, right? So it wasn't the tour we know now.
No. All the best players in the world just used to go there. I remember we won the final in 86 against France, and the French backline was Bizier. Salah played first receiver. I marked Blanco. He was at centre.
Oh, wow. And, that's great.
Esteve or Largesco were on the wings. And so, the best players in the world played in those days. They're pretty exciting times.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And just reflecting on your playing career, and you mentioned one coaching lesson there early on. What was some of the, coaching's come a long way in probably 20, 30 years. What were some of the coaching methodologies from your playing time that you feel would stand the test of time and be applicable today, knowing what we know?
Well, the standard coaching methodology was analytical in New Zealand. So you were taught, even as a little kid, you were taught how to meet the ball early, catch pass technique, where to put your hands, thumbs up, stuff I can still remember.
Yeah.
I was really lucky when I went. So I had really good coaches at high school. Had a guy, Dave Merito, who was a New Zealand Māori representative, played midfield. also for Waikato and the local club in Patauru. Had a maths teacher who was outstanding, spent a lot of time with me at lunch, looking at things like my kicking, just teaching small skills. So I was really fortunate having a good background behind me, I guess. And when I went to Canterbury, so my first year playing for Belfast, we played a pre-season game against University, and the coach of University was a guy called Laurie O'Reilly, who was one of the top family lawyers in New Zealand, and actually became Commissioner for Children for New Zealand eventually.
Right.
But he took for some reason he took an interest in me, and so he asked me to come round to his house on the following Sunday. And so I went round to his place, and his wife Kay opened the door, and I went in, and there he is standing in a white caftan. I come from a small rural town in New Zealand. I'd never seen
many of them.
Never seen a man in a dress before. I thought, he's different. But he became an outstanding mentor for me. And he's the man probably that I've got most to thank for helping launch my career. Whilst he wasn't employed by the union or anything like that, he used to run all the coaching camps in Canterbury, a lot of them. And he brought out Pierre Vulpre actually one year to a camp. He organised all this himself. Jim Greenwood, whose books I had been reading on the game, he was brought out to a camp, and myself and the Canterbury halfback at the time, Gary Barker, we were invited along to demonstrate some of the stuff for Jim Greenwood. So like this was in 1979, 1980. So early in my playing career, I was already been exposed to a lot of different coaching ideas and different coaching people. So Laurie O'Reilly was a massive one. The captain of my Canterbury team in those early years was Alex Wiley, Grizz Wiley, who of course became a famous Canterbury coach and then an All Black coach. But he was captain, played number 8, and it was the first time I'd really been captained by someone who ran the game strategically.
Right.
To the extent that he would often stop the game, and the referee would stop the game while Grizz spoke, and he'd come out and he'd make the call for me. We had 2 calls, righto and lefto from the scrums.
Yeah.
And so
that works.
he'd pull his head out of the scrum, and I'd either get the righto call or the lefto call. But he and Dougie Bruce, who I took over from as first 5 for Canterbury, they became Canterbury coaches during my career, and they were both really important mentors for me. Taught me a lot of strategically about the game, about how to learn from each play and what tactically the next move should be. So they were critical influences for me. And latterly in my All Black career, I was lucky enough to have Brian Lahore, who was probably our greatest All Black captain, or certainly one of them, was in charge of a team in the late 60s that was unbeaten, and changed the game, I think, in New Zealand from a kicking game to big athletic forwards being able to handle the ball. And you still see that today. So hugely influential figure in the game here, and became a really close mate. So playing under him was a highlight. And actually, my last game under him was not for the All Blacks, but it was for a World 15 at the IRB Centenary in 1986, where he and Templeton, the Australian coach, and Jacques Ferrou coached a world team. We played the Lions, and then we played a Southern Hemisphere versus Northern Hemisphere game that year. He was a great influence for me, both as a coach, but also latterly as an All Black selector when I was helping coach the All Blacks.
Yeah, I think, touching on, you're talking about rugby in the 60s, and I recently went through a phase of watching a lot of Wallabies games in the 80s, because we're short of wins these days. So I thought I'd go back into the time capsule. But I think there's a lot to be learnt there for coaches to go back to those old games and just see how, the game was dramatically different, but just offloading alone, I think there's a load to be learnt there for coaches by looking at those old matches.
Yeah, 100%. It's become very combative, hasn't it? The game, and we're going to have to look at some law changes shortly, not just from a safety point of view, but from a continuity and attacking point of view.
Yeah, I agree. The principles of play, we've got to hold those tight, and if we get away from that, it's no longer rugby. Well, with that kind of grounding, with some of the names you mentioned there, how were your first coaching experiences? What do you reflect upon there, and some of the good things, some of the things you learnt in that process?
Well, I actually I went to play in Italy in 1986.
Mm-hmm.
So in the latter years of my All Black career, like, I was never a great at the game, and I knew I wasn't going to be a great at the game. I had a lot of test matches, and I played for some great teams, but that was my whole ambition, was to be part of great teams rather than be a great player. And I knew
Mm-hmm.
I just had to be a cog in the teams. My apprentice, I suppose, in 84 and 85 in the All Blacks was a guy called Grant Fox.
Yeah.
And it soon became apparent to me that he was going to be a great of the game, and it was time for me to move on. So he took over in 86 with Frano Bodica, who was another great New Zealand 5'8". So I went to Italy, and I had I played for a small team in Italy called Casale sul Sile, up between Treviso and Venice.
Right.
And I'd been talked into being the head coach as well as the foreign player.
Yeah.
I had said to them, look, I didn't speak any Italian, and I didn't know anything about forward play. So I'd requested that I had someone who, an assistant coach who could speak English and knew how to coach forwards. So we turned up mid 1986, met my new coach, who not only didn't speak English, but hardly spoke Italian. He spoke a local dialect.
Love it.
And he played on the wing for Italy. So, it was a rocky start for someone who'd never coached a team in his life to then be player coach of a first division team in Italy. Had to learn pretty quickly. And it really shaped my coaching career.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I'd come from a more analytical background to a team that probably wasn't going to work, and I decided I decided through my time with the All Blacks in Canterbury that people will rise to a challenge if it's their challenge, but they weren't necessarily rise to other people's challenges.
Yeah.
And as coach, I thought I needed to really empower the boys and make sure that they owned the business, they owned the team, and that way I thought they would be inclined to put way more into it. So it started a whole philosophy, I suppose, of giving people making people accountable, and create some personal meaning with them. The second thing was, because I was learning the language, I was really determined to speak Italian to a high level, because I wanted to coach in the native language. And then I decided I didn't really know what they knew about the game, so I decided to start asking questions, and did it for two reasons. Firstly, it improved my Italian, so I can converse with them in Italian. But secondly, it was letting me understand what they knew about the game. And so I started asking them what they did. When they did that, what did you do? What did you see to make you do that? And what would you do next time? And I got to understand the guys and what they knew. But more than that, I noticed that they were becoming way more self-aware, and they were picking up things and retaining them much better than if I'd been telling them what to do. So today they call it query theory, but for me it was asking questions to get some descriptive answers, so I knew what they understood and what they were going to do. And the third thing was, and you probably you mentioned Vilpreux before, that I was exposed to a different methodology over there. So as I said, we were very analytical in New Zealand, and all of a sudden I had opportunities to watch Vilpreux, A guy called Andre Bonomo was coaching Benetton, and he those two were really influential on my development. So they had a way more global methodology of coaching than I'd been used to. Today they call it game-based learning. And in New Zealand, our whole philosophy was teach the skills and then play the game. For Pierre and Andre, it was play the game and the skills will come. And so it was opposing philosophies, if you like. But it gave me a real opportunity to marry the two types of coaching together. And whilst nothing I did was really original, the combination of the two methodologies was sort of original in rugby at the time. And that's the way I was exposed to coaching and the way I developed.
Yeah, no, and I think that's late 80s, early 90s. That's pretty groundbreaking stuff, and it's amazing that we still have coaches who are very drill based and not games based in 2021. So we're talking 30 years ago. How was that when you came back to New Zealand and you brought that methodology to your first practice in NZ? How'd that go down?
You can imagine how it went down.
Yeah.
Given that Grizz Wiley, that some the name's there for a reason. The perception of great coaches was pretty gruff, demanding, instructive, and it wasn't right or wrong. It was just how New Zealand had grown up, and it was the norm. So for me coming back, particularly when I went I started at a high level with Crusaders in 1997, and by that stage I'd sort of honed my three philosophies or methodologies. I'd honed them with Canterbury B. I'd honed them at my club Belfast. I was coaching Canterbury Sevens and New Zealand Sevens at the time, so I'd had a lot of opportunities to get better at what I was doing. But when I joined Crusaders, it'd be fair to say that my questioning techniques took a while to take root, and I soon realised I was asking the wrong questions, or I was asking the questions the wrong way. So I'd often ask, "Why did you do that?" And of course, that created a justification from the player, and often led to a wee bit of conflict when all I really meant was, "What did you do?" and what did you see to do that? So I started asking what questions rather than why or how.
That's cool.
And that was better at getting descriptive answers, and that's really what I was aiming for. So that was interesting. The first year, game-based learning was totally different for the boys. So putting them into smaller opposed activities, changing the size of the field to achieve what I wanted to achieve. I'd start with a field, and sometimes I'd have the defence, on the outside of the grid. The attack would be set up on the inside, and I'd throw the ball to the attack, and the defence would have to come in and try and defend it. So the players soon learnt to run square or arc back in it. The defenders coming in from the outside, drawing past, try and block a defender and try and score out wide. And then I'd swap it around and put the defenders in the grid and the attack outside the grid, and the attack would have to come in. And of course, the defence was already set, so they'd have to learn how to penetrate. So it was learning the game conceptually through those activities. And again, it took a while for it to bed down. So 97 was really a learning year for us together as a group, for me. And, I had an assistant coach. Well, he was a co-coach really, and Peter Sloan, who was more experienced than me and older than me yet, was named my assistant. And so we were learning together, and we were marrying two different types of techniques, and I sort of discovered that teaching or communication is a sliding scale. You can't always be one or the other. Lynn Kidman would argue that with me, but sometimes instruction does have a place in coaching, and sometimes you've just got to ensure that biomechanically this is the right technique. So we need to teach that. But as I say, it's a sliding scale, and I tend more towards the questioning side and empowerment, but there's a place for both.
Yeah, and I think that also calls on like having a diverse group of coaches as well. Like if you're the questioning type, you might want someone who's a bit more direct, and you can work together as a team in that way. Yeah. Well, you mentioned Lynn Kidman. Oh, sorry, go. Yep.
I was just going to say so Peter Sloan, who had been my assistant, he at the end we won the tournament in '98, so we beat the Blues up at Eden Park, which was a surprise to everyone, including us. The great Graham Henry was coaching an outstanding Blues team, and we managed to go up there and win it. And Peter Sloan then went to the All Blacks as assistant coach to John Hart. So I needed another assistant for '99. I'd played Steve Hansen had played a couple of games for Canterbury with me in the early years, and then when I coached Canterbury B, he was my captain. He was centre for Canterbury B, and he was captain. We got on particularly well, and I knew he had a great mind for the game. He'd had the education of a coach since a young boy with his dad Des. So he knew coaching, and he knew the game, and he knew me. So I applied to New Zealand Rugby to get him as my assistant at Crusaders for '99, and it was the start of, or the continuation of a long history between Steve and I. So we got on particularly well that year, and we won the championship again, and both finals, funnily enough, away from home, which seldom happens today. But in those days, in the early days of Super Rugby, it wasn't such a stigma really to play away from home. So we won at Eden Park, and then we beat the Highlanders down at Carisbrook. So they were great years, and really, really formative years for me. I was still pretty young, still reasonably green, I guess, but it had some early success. So it made it look like coaching was a breeze to me. I seemed to find out that it wasn't.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I think that was also a great time for Super Rugby too. That late '90s, early 2000. I think we got Super Rugby got so big and covered the entire Southern Hemisphere. And then you go back and you watch, like I just recently watched the heyday of the Brumbies. Those two finals they were in, and I was like, this is just amazing rugby, and I would watch this today. So I think there's a lot to be said with that, and how big the game got, and how it actually watered down a really good, I hate using the word product, but a really good setup for rugby in Southern Hemisphere.
Hugely competitive. The game back then, there weren't the blowouts, or not many blowouts today. Great coaches, great
Australian teams were actually okay as well.
Yeah, well, they had great things at the game, didn't they?
100%.
The AIS programs, coaching programs were in place, huge government funding.
Agree.
Had the McQueens and Coco Barry Honans and young Eddie Jones coming through. Hugely competitive and great footy. With Crusaders, because of the team had got last in '96, and it was a hell of a challenge. It was a new team. Well, we were all new teams, but there were particular challenges in that Crusader region at the time. There wasn't a lot of acceptance of Aucklanders playing for a red and black team, and we had Nelson Bays, Marlborough, West Coast, South Canterbury, Mid Canterbury were now all part of the Crusaders, and it wasn't Canterbury anymore. So there were some massive challenges in the game back in those days, and of course with my different methodologies of coaching, they weren't hugely accepted by the public. I didn't think at those times. Success later sort of bedded them in as genuine ways to coach. But back then, yeah, I was known as a mad professor, I think. And the way we played, so we didn't have a very strong, like we had a great pack, don't get me wrong, a great group of forwards, but we weren't very set piece oriented. So we put a lot of emphasis on defence and counter-attack. And we were a hugely attacking team, probably played differently to a lot of the other teams. Whilst everyone was an attacking team in those days, but we tended to attack off different platforms. And it was hugely successful for that group of players.
Yeah, great. Well, you mentioned earlier there Lynn Kidman, and in terms of coaching pedagogy, she's an absolute giant when you talk about things like teaching games for understanding. What was the connection there with you and Lynn Kidman, and how has that kind of developed your overall coaching philosophy in how you approach the game?
I was introduced to Lynn by David Hadfield, who's one of our foremost sports psychs in New Zealand.
Right.
He and Gilbert and Oka were, every team I've been in, he's been part of the coaching staff. David Hadfield, big influence through New Zealand rugby. Latterly, David Galbraith, similarly. So I've been lucky to be exposed to three of the great sports psychs involved in rugby, I would say. So David Hadfield introduced me to Lynn. Lynn initially, I think, wanted to check that what I was saying was true. But she came along to a lot of trainings, observed. It was great for me. It forced me to live what I was saying.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can slip away from your philosophy, under pressure. But, having her there was great. I learned a lot from her. She, as you know, she's way down the sliding scale towards games for understanding and player empowerment. So she was a huge influence on me, really. Just having her there and making sure that I was being true to what I believed in, and she helped me with that. I'd already been coaching Crusaders before I met her, so things like theming, creating personal meaning, developing a vision-driven, values-based campaign, all stuff that Gilbert and I and Pete Sloan had experimented with, and we couldn't find a lot of information around the world around that about creating personal meaning or a legacy or an identity with your sports team. And so we did some stuff that was different, I think, to what anyone else was doing, and pretty confronting at the time, because I wasn't quite sure how it was going to work. It can look pretty corny, that stuff, if you don't get buy-in. But luckily, it was fresh and it was meaningful, and we did get buy-in, and it's now commonplace in the game.
It stood the test of time. Yeah,
back in the mid-90s, it wasn't something. So that's how I met Lynn, and had a long relationship with her, and she's kept me honest many times.
Yeah, I think her book, Coaching Decision Makers, I read that 15 years ago, and I just realized I was doing everything wrong, and needed to have a good hard look at my own coaching philosophy. So I mention that book all the time on the podcast, and it's amazing. And the athlete-centered approach and the games-based approach and the player-centered leadership approach. It's a fabulous book.
Isn't it great though, Andy, that you read something, realised you could make some changes, and then went out of your comfort zone to make them, and that's a growth mindset, and that to me is coaching and playing.
Yeah.
And you never finish learning in this game. Like, I'm 64, I have my gold card next year, learning all the time.
Yeah.
When you share an idea, you get 5 back. So it just never stops.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's a great philosophy, and I think speaking of learning, like looking at the Trans-Tasman competition, we spoke a little bit about it before the interview. What were your observations? What did you learn from that brand new competition, and two different styles of play between two countries? What, like, with your coach's eye looking at that, what did you get from that?
Yeah, I think the game, you've talked about game back in the 80s and 90s. The game's evolved hugely, not always for the better. My concerns for the game, there seem to be very few people who are prepared to not follow the herd. As the game's gone professional and it became your job, there was way less tendency for coaches to put the head up above the parapet because it gets cut off. And my day didn't really matter in those early days of coaching because it wasn't professional. We were amateurs who were doing what we loved doing, and it didn't matter that we did stuff differently. It didn't matter if they didn't want you back next year because you had your day job. So things have changed. I felt in both competitions, if you look at the data around attack, most attacks from phase plays now have only 2 passes in them, and that's counting halfback pass. So most teams essentially do the same, and that they set up a pot of forwards. It'll probably go to the second forward, the forwards outside and inside, clean that ruck, and so that's only a 1 pass. It's only a 1 pass attack. So I think the average is probably 2 passes, which isn't a hell of an exciting when everyone's doing the same thing. So that's the first thing I would say, that that in general a lot of teams are playing the same. Some things that I liked, or some things that I don't like, firstly, about the game. Repetitive resets of scrums.
It was brutal. It was brutal. Yeah.
I think there needs to be a coaching movement away from scrumming.
I totally agree.
To penalties. The whole idea of the game when it's in the early days of rugby school in England, it was a game of grouping and spreading. And to me, when you've got a scrum, you've got a grouped set piece where you've got 16 players in a small huddle. That's time to be really positive, get clean ball, and then use it in an attacking way. Instead, today, there's a lot of playing for a penalty, kicking that to touch, maybe driving for another penalty from the line out. And there's continual resets, continual mauls that are going down. No one understands the laws in a maul anymore. So I think those are some areas of the game that have become predictable and tiresome, I think. Box kicks, I'm not a fan of box kicks. In fact, with my team Kobe in Japan, I banned them from 9.
Nice. Like it.
At best, they're 50-50.
Yeah.
At worst, they're a 10-90. And to me, they reflect fear. They reflect coaches that aren't prepared to
I agree.
have a crack, and they want to throw the ball up and hope that they get a positive result. So that's a generalisation, but those are some things that I don't like. What I have liked from what I've seen, I've liked the Highlanders in that they play slightly differently to everyone else. So the ball carriers will tend to step to offset a defender. The support players, the first thing the support players do in the Highlanders is they support the ball carrier for an offload.
That's classic Vilpero.
Yeah, exactly. And whereas a lot of other teams, those support players are just there to clean the ruck. Highlanders' first option, looks to me anyway, is their first option is to take the offload and keep the game going. They will adjust and clean if that pass doesn't get made. So I like that. Crusaders clearly, I think, are a step ahead. So I like the way they spread the field in attack and they all come forward. They line up in open doorways, so they're always attacking holes. If a outside defender makes a mistake and comes in, then they'll tip to that next hole and they're through. And they've got really good training support, so they're able to keep the ball alive all the time, particularly in counter-attacks. They're very effective. So I think they're setting the platform for how the game could be played. Not all the time, but often. I also like the way they learn from their plays. So if you watch them in the first half, so they'll make their plays that they've planned to make, and they generally have 3 or 4 options off the play, and they'll get through to half time. They might be up sort of 13-6 or something like that, and you'll see them accelerate in the second half.
Yeah.
In a really good half, understanding who's now unmarked in those plays or who's the least marked in those plays. So they'll be the moves that they play after half time. They'll go to the least defended areas, and often it results in a quick escalation of the score. Goes up really quickly, simply because they're now making the right plays based on their learning. So I really enjoy that about them. So there are things I think in Super Rugby that you can take off every team, but there are a couple of things that stand out to me. I like the way a couple of the coaches, Brad Thorne in particular up at Reds, has created an environment that gets the best out of his players.
Yeah.
They're not consistent yet, and they play a reasonably tight game, but they play for each other, a bit like the Brumbies, a bit like the Force. Something I really enjoyed with those teams, they really played for each other.
Yeah.
And whilst their game was slightly behind that, I think of the New Zealand boys. I think they gave everything, and they showed that with continued games against opposition like the New Zealand teams, I think they're going to get better pretty quickly, because they seem to have the culture and the environment to do that.
Yeah, and that can't be underestimated. And that's a really cool point too, what you said about the Crusaders. Like that shows a really efficient use of the halftime break from the coaches and players on what they're doing in that 10, 12 minutes that they get to chat. They're getting every drop out of that.
Yeah, and you can see on the field, Moronga, the 10, getting really good feedback from the people around him, and then him having the skill clearly and the understanding to execute the right play. We're lucky in New Zealand with some of the 5'8s, particularly here in Bowden Barrett, world leading, I think, at the moment, along with a couple of the Northern Hemisphere guys. But they're outstanding to watch. Yeah.
All right, you mentioned Kobelco Steelers there. What's that ride been like? A bit rocky in the last year, but with COVID and everything. But how'd that role come about, and what's the coaching experience like there and in Japan, and who have you got around you that's doing some really cool things on the field?
I finished with the All Blacks at the end of 2017.
Mm-hmm.
I actually I'd been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and I knew I had to get the operation done at the end of that year. So I finished with the All Blacks after the Rugby Championship. Didn't go on tour, got my operation done, and was talking to Kobe about some sort of role. It was going to be more sort of a spot coach, mentoring type role. But at the end of 2017, so I had recruited some coaches that I had a lot of faith in. My head coach, Dave Dillon, who I'd worked with, he was a player development manager actually at Chiefs when I was there. Had a lot of time for him and felt that he had huge potential as a head coach. Steve Cumberland, who had been a forward coach at Highlanders for a few years when I was with the All Blacks, I got to know him well. I had a lot of time for him. Nick Holton, who had played for Chiefs years before and had a long history in Japan, particularly with Toshiba, and had been successful. Brought him into a position. And Scott Hansen, who's the attack coach at the moment for Crusaders, he was already there, and so we retained him. So I put put a group of coaches together, including a couple of Japanese intern coaches. Found that they had really good staff there, but the team hadn't been successful for a lot of years. Since 2002, I think, was the last time we had success. So I did a bit of research around the clubs. It was pretty consistent that most people thought Kobe had talent, but they had a soft underbelly. They had some pretty flash cars in the car park, but didn't last more than 20 minutes on the field. And so it seemed to me just being a spot coach or a coaching mentor wasn't going to cut the mustard. And if I wanted to make a difference, I had to really get involved at a high level. So that's what we did. Instead of spending 8 weeks a year there, I was spending 218, 219, 220. I was there about 20 weeks, just over 20 weeks, I think, and thoroughly enjoyed it. The key agreement I got from Kobe at the start was I had, when I was a kid in Putaruru, something that really changed my vision of the game was it was 1968 All Japan tour to New Zealand. And, you imagine a little country kid playing rugby in a small area. You all play the same way, and you see rugby the same way. And so this All Japan team came out, and Dad took me to see the Bay of Plenty game, and I'd never seen anything like it.
That's great.
So they didn't jump in the line out. They would more likely to drop down to their knees and throw the ball at their knees, and then they'd pass it back to the halfback, and then they'd play. They just played. And they had this little winger, Demi Sakata on the wing, little fella, scored 5 tries against Bay of Plenty. 5 tries on the wing. I'd never seen anything like it. And they beat Bay of Plenty. And of course, 67, 68, 69 were unbeaten years for the All Blacks, New Zealand rugby. So it was just huge. We were hugely on a wave of brilliant rugby. And so All Japan played the junior All Blacks, who were a hell of a strong. They were the next people in line, next players in line for the All Blacks. And Demi Sakata scored 4 tries against the junior All Blacks, and All Japan beat the junior All Blacks. And it was just amazing. It was just, everything was about movement, and if they kicked, they only kicked positively to their own players or on the ground to make it bounce, and they were there to create mayhem. And so the agreement I had with Kobe, I explained what I'd seen from Japan, and I'd always had this vision of being able to go to a team and replicating what I saw that day. So that was the agreement I had.
That's fantastic.
So, and I had coaches who were prepared to come along for the ride. And so we developed a hugely attacking game. We've got really good S&C trainers, because we had to get to play the game that we wanted to play. We had to get to a level of fitness that no one else could live with. And so that's what we did. And we went through the first year unbeaten. We played Suntory in the final up in Tokyo at their home ground, actually, and beat them 55-5.
Amazing.
And it was one of the most exhilarating performances I've ever been involved in.
That's fantastic.
And it come from this vision of All Japan. And so one of the things I was really adamant on, that I was going to ban box kicks. You can imagine.
Doesn't work. Doesn't work for you.
The team had been based on driving, setting up penalties, kick, touch, box kick, throw it up like a grenade and see what happens. And so when I banned them, there was and brought in a new kicking philosophy. It was hard work, even though we had Daniel Carter and Andy Ellis there, 2 of the best players I've ever coached and 2 of the smartest. It still took a while to get out of the conservative kicking strategy into an attacking one. But anyway, in that final against Suntory, I think we kicked 7 times. We scored off a couple of them. And the only try that Suntory got was from a box kick that we did by mistake.
Point proven right there.
Yeah, and it created a bit of chaos, and the ball changed hands a couple of times, and Suntory ended up scoring. But anyway, what it did, Kobe I think it rejuvenated the game, created a lot of pride for the company. My coaches were outstanding at delivering it. We had a great year the following year as well. We beat Kubota 43-7, I think, in the final, after having played Suntory in the semi-final in 2019. 220 was again another outstanding year, but they called the competition off halfway through, so it never completed. So this year we were going for a three-peat, 3 championships in a row. I don't know if you've ever been involved in doing that, but it's hell of a hard.
I have. I lost it in the third. Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, I was talking to a guy I played with yesterday about it. It's a difficult thing.
Tough things change. In those first couple of years, everyone's hands up.
Yeah.
You wanting to do your gratitude stuff around the community and help each other and work above and beyond what anyone else prepared to do. But slowly and surely, there always it sort of comes, it sneaks through, but becomes more a sort of handout attitude, unknowingly, unwittingly, by people. I'm not just talking about players here, but everyone. But just wanting a bit more for doing a bit less. Pat Riley talks about in his great book, The Winner Within, and it's true. And not only is it true, it's very difficult to halt. I've been involved a few times with it, and still haven't got the answer. Still haven't really got on top of it. The only three-peat I've been involved with that was successful was Crusaders. So when we won in 98 and 99, but I became All Black coach in 2000, and Robbie Deans, who had been my manager at Crusaders, took over as Crusaders coach and beat the Brumbies in Canberra for our three-peat, for our third win. But I wasn't there. I wasn't involved. And when I look back now, I think that was a positive. I'm pretty sure if I'd been involved, we would have won it. And
that's a good point.
I'm convinced that you need change. You need fresh ideas. You don't need to change the bone deep stuff. What you need to do is experiment around the fringes a bit more. And you tend not to do that, I think. You tend to think, let's just go back to the fundamentals of what got us here, and let's just keep working on those. But as I say, I've tried it 2 or 3 times and it hasn't worked. But maybe I can learn next time. The other thing was, for me, it was a frustrating year because I never saw a game this year. We got stuck back in New Zealand. I had a health reason for not going back, and so we were trying to work on Zoom. Now Zoom's a great platform, isn't it? But it's not an effective way to coach or even to mentor, really. You can send all the videos you like and all the drawings you like and have all the Zooms you like, but it's difficult if you're not there to help the guys. And so it wasn't the season we wanted. We were unbeaten, like in 4 seasons we were unbeaten. We'd had a couple of draws, but we were unbeaten. We lost the playoff game against Kubota, and rightly so. We didn't play well, and we didn't deserve the three-peat. So Kobe going to have to start again.
Yeah. Well, there's always next year. That's the beauty of coaching, right? And when you are, this final question before I go with the final 4 questions that I always finish the pod with. When you're coaching full on in those kind of times in Japan and with the All Blacks and those kind of things, how do you switch off? Like when you get that time to pull away from the games, Sunday or Monday, how do you detach yourself from the game and the experiences that you've just had?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the best book I've ever read in terms of leadership would be Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. One of the key things I got from his book was around balance in your life. So you've got 3 or 4 areas to your life. So for me, it's always been myself, obviously. So making sure that I'm fit and well, my family, and my work, rugby. Rugby was my work most of my life. So how you balance those is really important, and giving to each of those areas is really important. So I went from being a workaholic, and I promised myself that when I started coaching that no one in the world would outwork me. And I got to the stage where I was the first into work, and I would just stay at night until I thought every other coach in the world would have gone home by now, and then I'd go home. It wasn't a healthy way to do it. I had huge support from my wife, and we had twin boys, and I was really lucky there, clearly, that I was able to do that. But it wasn't the right way to do it. So once I read Covey's book, and then I was lucky enough to go to a conference that he ran in Wellington, and just outstanding. It basically changed the way I operated. So now, and I teach this to the staff, and I teach it to the players.
That's great.
We have to keep a diary that every day you've got to put something in for your family, put something in for yourself, put something, and then you've obviously got your schedule for the team. But what you put in for your family, what you put in yourself, has got to be, it's set in concrete. So you can't just teach it because something comes up. And what I found was, by the time I got to the end of the week, I could see, I was quite famous at New Zealand Rugby Union, actually, because they could all see my diary. But I was famous for walking the dog at a strange time, or taking my wife to the movies, or taking the boys to rugby training or hockey or whatever they were playing. And it was always part of my schedule. But it really helps, and it gives you balance. And so for me, my balance away from rugby is just little things. I don't like going to golf or doing stuff that takes you away for a whole day. I'd rather go walk the dog with my wife Trish, or go and take a rugby ball out with my grandson, or whatever. Just do little things like that. That's what I need. And you're selfish enough as a coach, I think, with all the time you spend. I got to the stage with the All Blacks where we'd finish a test match, and when I was coaching defence and counter-attack, I would go back up to my room after a meal and a couple of drinks with the boys, and I would code the counter-attack until about 2 a.m, go to sleep, and then I'd get up, and Sunday was dedicated to coding. I used to do a lot of my own coding rather than just leaving it up to Opta or leaving it up to our analysts. I like to do it myself because it gave me a better feeling for the game and for the performance and the data. So I'd do that the next day for the defence, and then I'd bring it all together on the Sunday night, and then we'd start again, And so in camp you get very little downtime, and when you do, you've got to use it wisely. And we had a group of us who'd go to the gym, have a coffee together, just little things like that.
Yeah, no, it's great advice for coaches, and I think it's something we notoriously don't do well. So coaches listening, we can get some great ideas there. All right, Wayne, well, we always end the show with the same final 4 questions. When you were back in your younger days playing, who was one of the players that you really looked up to and thought, that's how I want to play rugby?
Well, I had a couple. Every Sunday when I was a little kid, Dad and I used to listen to LPs, 45s of rugby tours.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Music, rugby tours. And so I remember, so I followed 56 Springboks. I wasn't born till 57, but I was able to follow them through these records. My favourite player back then from those tours was 59 Lions, Tony O'Reilly on the wing. He captured my imagination. But then as I got a bit older and started watching the All Blacks, Ian Kirkpatrick was my favourite player. Yeah. He was a 6, but he could play 6, 7, 8. He could have played on the wing if you wanted him to. He was just an outstanding all-round player and man. And even today, I still revere him today. He's a good friend, but I still revere him. So he was my idol, I suppose, the picture I had up on the wall.
Great. And second question, what about now? Who are some of the players around the world that you're enjoying watching as a fan?
Well, I think Aaron Smith, to me, is the most influential player in the world.
Yeah, agreed.
Not just as a great passing, running, kicking halfback, but I think his influence on others in the team. He's a hugely committed trainer. He plans his training well. It's highly connected to his game. What he does, everything he does is to make his game better. And the way he talks to his team on the field, at training and during games, I think is outstanding, inspirational. So to me, he's someone I really enjoy watching. I love watching Mo'unga and Barrett. Clearly at the moment, there's a contest going on for who's going to start at 5'8". But in the All Blacks, there really never is a contest. All Blacks, we have a tradition of making each other better by helping each other at training. And if you look at guys like Kevin Mialamu and Andrew Hall coming through together, one played over 100 tests, one played over 80, but they made each other better every training run. And that's what Mo'unga and Barrett do. So I really enjoy that. I like watching them play. And someone else I really enjoy watching play is Sam Whitelock, simply because he's won 2 World Cups, 211 and 215. And he keeps going like every game is a World Cup final. And I love that in him. And he's got a huge influence on the people around him. So those are the Kiwis that I love watching. I've really enjoyed Harlequins this year.
Yeah,
and you talk
great
about
run.
Not following the herd and being prepared to put your head up. People like Nick Evans, who's the attack coach.
Yeah, former flyer for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. And great man, Nick Evans. And so I've really enjoyed watching Marcus Smith, who I think has a wee bit of Mo'unga and Barrett about him. He's prepared to take risks, and he learns from the game. He makes passes that no one else would make because he knows that that's where the hole was last time. So I've enjoyed watching him. And Lewis Liner, I don't know if they call him Louis or Lewis.
Yeah, actually. Right.
I played against Michael, obviously, and I coached him at Benetton in Italy when John Kieran was playing for them. So they were my 2 finals. So, I follow him as well. And he's a beautiful player to watch.
Yeah, there's something coming there. Yeah. Awesome. All right. And third question, what about coaches? Who are some of the coaches that you look up to and respect and that you learn from as well, as a way of getting better yourself?
Well, I've talked about, other coaches already. One guy I've got a lot of admiration for is Stuart Lancaster.
Yep.
So, you've got to go through hard times as a coach. There's no doubt about that. And I had that in 2001 with the All Blacks, where I was, I probably wasn't quite ready for the All Blacks at the time. We'd missed out on winning a couple of Tri-Nations by the skin of our teeth. Both years were eras that I felt responsible for. And I paid the price for that because I always hold myself accountable, no one else. And that was looked at as a weakness, I think, by the New Zealand Rugby Union Board at the time. They felt I showed a weakness by showing some, not responsibility for what happened, but possibly a lack of they felt I had a lack of confidence in what I was doing, I think, whereas all I was doing was questioning myself. However, Stu had to go through the same stuff. And what I saw from him was, rather than going in his shell and thinking, woe is me, he travelled the world. He came down here. He stayed one night with Trish and I. He travelled the world to learn, and he's got a huge growth mindset. I think he's a real example for coaches to look at. So what I mean by growth mindset is he's never just been happy doing what everyone else does. So he's always been prepared to make mistakes, to try different things, try different ways of doing things. He's always tried to get better, and I really admire that in him. And he's come back and he's proven people wrong. He was vilified after not winning or not even getting through to the playoffs in the World Cup in 2015, and he changed who he is, changed how he operates. He learnt and he's applied that with Leinster, and there's they're possibly the best club team in the world now, Leinster.
Yeah.
I've got a huge admiration for what he's done.
Yeah, no, that's great. I agree. I had him on the podcast too, and totally agree. And it was a good chat, that one. All right, final question before we wrap things up. Someone without Stuart Lancaster's profile and the other coaches you mentioned, someone who's in the grassroots doing really good things that you feel deserves some recognition.
Yeah, there are a lot of, like, it's just a bit unfair to name people.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of examples, I think, in heartland rugby and grassroots rugby in New Zealand at the moment, who are working really hard at getting kids back into the game. We've got a bit of a phenomenon here where kids aren't necessarily playing rugby anymore, or a lot of organised sports.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a guy, Steve Milne, who had played. I remember watching him as a player. He's younger than me. He played for New Zealand Maoris. He went to Japan. He actually played for Japan. So he came back to a place called Te Puke in the Bay of Plenty, and decided to help their junior rugby at the club there. And they had very few kids coming along. It was on a downward spiral. So he developed a concept of backyard rugby, which is the way I learned.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Backyard rugby and bull rush, and so he's brought that whole philosophy back, and he's taken the club from having about, I don't know, a handful of kids to having probably 70 kids now playing the game again. He's got really good ideas, and I think we need to take to New Zealand rugby on the game at that level. And so he's just one example of many, but I thought he was a good example that people might know the name, Steve Milne, but there are others. There's a club in Cambridge, Hautapu, run by a guy called Jake Morland, who's older guy now, but he's the doyen of the club. Well, they've got 740 kids.
Wow.
At that club. 740
That's amazing.
kids. They don't all play rugby, but the rugby club have branched out, and they've got a hockey team, netball team, rugby teams. And so, to me, that's a modernisation of sport, and probably what needs to happen. With so many other things in life that rugby's often a fifth or sixth priority now instead of the number one priority it used to be when I was a kid.
No, I agree, and it's a great message for how to keep a community strong and together as well. Having people like that doing that great work. Yeah. All right, Wayne. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. 100th show I've wanted to get you on for a long time. So thanks for answering my repeated emails, and it's been great chatting to you. I think it'll be a really well received podcast, and I've had a great time. So thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Love sharing ideas, and hopefully people will see me as a 64-year-old coach, but just shows you that learning never finishes. You're always finding something new out about your game. So that's my life.
All right, perfect, awesome. Thanks, Wayne.
Thanks for listening to the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a review via iTunes and keep listening for the next episode. You can also follow us via Twitter at Rugby Coaches CNR or via the website therugbycoachescorner.com. Until next time, keep sharing ideas to make the game better.